Hey everybody, it is Sunday morning and I'm going to take a quick trip around the world. We've done a few things here in the fish room, and so we're going to talk about them today, but we're not going to make it a too lengthy video. If you'd like to see all my tanks in more detail, you can tune in for my live streams every Friday night and Sunday night, 8 p.m. Eastern time, and we go around the room and we feed each tank and we get a good 5-10 minute look at each tank as we go around the room, and we just kind of hang out in the fish room. It's generally a good time to be had by all. So check out my live streams Friday night, Sunday night, 8 p.m. Eastern time. And in the meantime, let's have a quick look around the world. So with my pond here, I have found that doing periodic sort of external filterings is keeping the water nice and clear for me. I do have an internal filter, but it's pretty small, it's not very efficient, and I don't change it very often, so that makes it even less efficient. But underneath of here, I do have a filter, and if you look very closely, you can see a hose that comes all the way down here and comes out, and it's actually pointing this way, and so I do get a little bit of a rotational flow of water from the filter, and it does pull some of the crud out. But again, I find that setting a bucket up and putting some filter material in the bucket and then just running a pump and just pumping the water right through the filter for several hours once a month or so keeps the tank or the pond looking nice and beautiful and clean. So that's about all we've got going on internally within the pond. I did make an adjustment to the way the water flows in. I was getting a lot of splashing, and so I didn't want the carpet being wet constantly. And I added a larger rock to the top, and you can see I am still getting some splashing, but it's mostly sort of directed that way. I was getting a lot of sideways splashing, and I was getting a lot of splashing down on this side as well, and so it seems as though my new configuration has that all taken care of. So everything seems to be going peachy with the pond. We do have another flower that's getting ready to open up here on the peace lily. And we'll talk about what's in that bucket when we get around to it, so hold tight. Alright, I am going to turn this light off in the meantime so we have a little bit less glare on the other tanks as we make our way around the room. And we're going to start here with the 29 miscellaneous. Get my equipment out of the way. Not much going on with the 29. This is one of those tanks that just sort of sits there and ticks over like a clock. You can see the angelfish right there in the middle. My Anubias is growing well. That got cut back, I don't know, within the last 6 months or so. I had to trim that back, and that's probably going to have to get trimmed again within the next few months. Java fern, likewise, I removed some of the Java fern out of there and opened it up to let the light and, let the light in and let the fish swim around more. And that's starting to grow in pretty heavily. And I also stuck a piece of pothos in the tank. It's not in the filter, it's just hanging down there in the tank, so we'll see if that doesn't root in and start growing eventually. But again, not a lot going on with the 29 miscellaneous. So we will move the tripod out of the way again, and we'll come over here and have a look at the 55-gallon gourami tank. Now, I haven't done anything different in the gourami tank in a while, but I have noticed that my coolie loaches are starting to die off, and I'm down to 1 or possibly 2 coolie loaches in there, and I used to have 4 or 5. And so I think I might add a few more of them just to get the sort of lively activity back up, because those coolie loaches were fun to watch. They would chase each other around the tank, and it was just a lot of interest and excitement. I do have other loaches in the tank that are laying low at the moment. My little rubber lip pleco is out making an appearance. Don't see him terribly often, but he is out and about at the moment. You can see my discus is still doing well. We will see the tank this discus came from. I had 3 of them. They were a gift from one of my viewers. and the two other ones that were in the tank had paired off and were bullying this one and preventing it from eating and keeping it all stressed out. And so I pulled it out of that tank and put it in this tank, and it seems to be doing much better. Same viewer also gifted me this beautiful lace zebra angelfish, which has also made its way into this tank and is doing well, growing nicely, looking gorgeous. And overall, the whole tank is doing nicely. We did a water change not too long ago. I got a lot of that excess Java moss out of there. We got the glass wiped down. And just got the tank looking nice and sharp. So moving on to the big stunning change. Holy cow, look at that. This is my 55-gallon tank. Used to be my angelfish tank once upon a time, but now I just refer to it as my 55. And as of the other day, that bucket full of crypt was actually in this tank, and you could not see anything. If you check out some of my older but more recent videos or some of my live streams from even a week ago, you will see that this tank was almost completely filled top to bottom, left to right, with that crypt. You could not see the fish swimming around in there. There was so much crypt in there. So we took a bunch of that out, opened the tank up, got everything nice and looking pretty. I do have an angelfish in this tank that is not doing well. I'm sorry, not an angelfish, a discus. I do have a discus fish in this tank that is not doing well. I'm not sure where he is at the moment. You can say he's probably down here hiding in the corner because that's where he keeps hiding. Used to have this power head angled down and across the back. You can see it's collected up a lot of the free-floating roots that I broke loose. I'll have to get in there and clean all that off. But I did have that power head pointing sort of down and across the back, so it would prevent any detritus or anything from building up behind all that dense vegetation, and it would push it down here to where my filter intake is behind this big rock. The problem was this poor angelfish, this poor discus, is struggling with a swim bladder issue. I've medicated the tank. I've gone through almost an entire container of Canaplex now. I've done 5 doses of the Canaplex. And if the Canaplex doesn't sort it out, I really don't know what else to do for a swim bladder issue. This is not an issue of the swim bladder being bloated and the fish floating. This is the other end of the spectrum. This is where the fish cannot achieve buoyancy and has to struggle constantly to stay up in the water column, or it just has to lie on the bottom like that to conserve energy. So one of the things I did was I angled the power head upwards so it's not just blowing all that water right on the poor fish, causing it to struggle. And I have also been making sure I'm getting food back there so that the discus doesn't have to go out looking for food. Now, when I came down this morning and turned the lights on a little while ago, that discus was all the way up by the surface and was swimming around. It still looks really skinny. Obviously, it's using a lot of energy and it's not able to eat a lot of food. And so it still looks really skinny, and it is still doing the constant swimming. The moment it stops paddling, it just begins to sink to the bottom. Again, think of what Mario looks like when Mario is swimming. The moment you stop hitting that button, he starts sinking. And that's exactly what this fish does in the water. So I've seen it a bunch over the years. It's a bad swim bladder. I don't know what to do to correct it. It's usually caused by some sort of bacterial infection. Again, we're treating with the Canaplex. If that doesn't sort it out, I really don't know what else I can do to help it. So there you go. That is probably the biggest change we're going to see here in the fish room. I was hoping that my little Synodontis there would make an appearance, but I do have a catfish that lives inside this hollow log. You can see his little tail right there and his little whiskers up front. That is a Synodontis lucipinus. I bought it as a Synodontis petricola, but if it was a petricola, it would be much bigger than that by now. This is not much bigger than it was the day I bought it, and this is probably about 10 years old now, and it's still only a couple of inches, maybe 3 inches long at the most, and so that can't be a petricola. A petricola gets about 5 to 7 inches, if I'm not mistaken. So this is probably the Lucipinus. They commonly get mistaken for each other. So I've got that. I've got a clown pleco somewhere that lives in this log as well. And if you actually look at this log, it's hollow from one end to the other. The fish can completely swim all the way down the length of this log. Even through this whole section here is completely hollow, and they can come all the way out the other end. So it makes for good habitat, and it's also visually appealing. And now, of course, you can actually see it. I've also got this piece of woodwork here. It's got the Java moss growing on it. Got all those rocks in the back that you probably never even noticed I had. Big changes to this tank. So moving on to the next tank that we've got some changes. I don't know if we're going to call them big or not. But my filter has been leaking. You can see all that water in there. And so I've just decided to disconnect the filter. So this tank is now operating filterless. It's been operating filterless for several days now, maybe 4 or 5 days. And as I suspected, everything is ticking over like a clock. Everything looks lovely. And all I have done so far was add this power head to the back, which has spun itself around and is now blowing straight against the glass on the far end. And it's not really giving me the circulation I wanted, but it is still moving some water around in there. And that will compensate for the water that used to get moved by the spray bar. You'll notice now there's no water movement at all in front of that spray bar. You can see those roots and plants and everything are just hanging completely motionless. So might have to make an adjustment to the way this power head is functioning down here. But other than that, as I anticipated, that I would be able to just disconnect that filter and everything would just continue ticking over like a clock. If you set your tanks up right, well, I won't say right. If you set your tanks up in a way that is conducive to it, you don't really need a filter. Again, that's not necessarily the right way to set your tank up, but if you set your tank up the way I set mine up, I have in the past on many occasions forgotten to turn filters back on after water changes, and I've had issues in the past, so I long ago learned to put some redundancy into my tanks. There's enough biofiltration going on in the tank itself that if the filter failed, the tank would be okay. I've got power heads, I've got an air stone, I've got other methods of water circulation and gas exchange and biological filtration, etc. So that again, if my filter ever did fail, it theoretically should just be fine. And I have forgotten to turn filters on in the past, and all my tanks have always just been fine. All my tanks are set up in such a way that if the filters were to just magically go away one day, the tank would just keep right on ticking over. And not only have I proved that to myself many times over the years, there's proof positive right there for you, the viewer, right now. It's been, again, 4 or 5 days, and we're going to leave the filter off of that tank for the time being. If I run into issues, or we start having problems, or it starts getting a lot of crud and detritus building up in there, something like that, I can always put a filter back on it. But for now, we're going to go filterless and see how this works out over the next few months. All right, moving on to my other 125. Nothing really going on in here. I do have this net lying up here. If you'll notice this one Gambusia right there, that is my last Gambusia. They were a school of a bunch of them when I caught them years ago. You can think of them as wild guppies. They only have a few year lifespan, and that one has been in there for probably 4 years now or something. They've been in there forever. I had 2 of them for the longest time, and one finally died, and I'm down to that last one. So I'm gonna, one of these days, if I get the net handy, I'm gonna scoop him out of there, and I have another tank that I can put him in. It does have some other Gambusia in it, and so he won't be alone. They are a schooling fish, and I'm sure he would be much happier for the last days of his life if he were in a tank with some other schooling fish like himself. So we're going to try to do that at some point. Not going to stress him out too much. I tried to catch him before, but he was too wily, hid in the bushes down there and I wasn't able to get him. And again, I'm not going to completely stress the whole tank out trying to catch one stupid little fish. We're going to just do what we can do. If I can get in there and dip him out one day real quickly without him noticing, we're going to do that. Otherwise, not too worried about it. In the meantime, everything else in this tank is just sort of ticking over. Not a whole lot going on. I've got my rainbow shark down there. Got my spotted tilapia hiding in the corner there. I've got an angelfish. Got a clown pleco. You can actually see the clown pleco's tail right there. I've got a big high fin spotted pleco that's a little over a foot long in this tank. We got the white suckerfish on the bottom. We got all of my silver dollars hiding under there. And the thing I'm honestly most excited about with this tank is the fact that I've got some moss growing on my woodwork now. And this moss is growing there. It's rooted, well, moss doesn't have roots, but it does sort of grab a hold of the surface it's growing to. And it has done that there. It has done this here. That's not just sitting there anymore. That's actually sort of connected to that. Again, moss doesn't have a official root system, but it does sort of grab a hold of what it's growing to. And we had some cool mushrooms growing out of this patch, and we do still have some little weeds and stuff growing up out of it. I just pulled some clumps of moss out of the backyard and stuck them there. So I brought in whatever I brought in with it. And it gives a place for my little jumpy bugs to hide. I've got little springbacks all over my surface of my tank. And the moss gives them a place to hide and gives them food to munch on. And everybody's happy. Moving on to my snail tank. This is formerly my snail tank, although it is still full of snails. This is my shrimp tank now. These are Neocardinia, I believe. I was given these as a gift as well. And they are thriving in the tank. I was also given some frog bit. And we're trying to let that frog bit grow in. I would really like to see some of that propagate in some of my other tanks, and I have actually spread it around in a few other tanks. I forgot to mention that in a couple tanks. It's not that big a deal though. But if we look in there and you start looking around really closely, you'll begin to see little baby shrimp everywhere. I have removed shrimp from this tank on a few occasions already. Like I was saying, I've started sprinkling them in some of my other tanks. And I'm going to keep doing that as long as they're breeding in here, and as long as I just have an abundance of shrimp, we're going to keep spreading them around and see if I can't get them to take hold in some of my other tanks. Now obviously some of the tanks are filled with the kind of fish that are going to make that impossible, but we're going to do our best to get them into the tanks that we can get them into. My fancy goldfish tank here is looking good. We did a water change. Well, actually I didn't do a water change. All I did was wipe the glass down. I haven't changed the filters on this tank, and I can't even remember when the last time I actually did a filter change on this tank, because again, the water doesn't really need to flow through my biological material. Look at that. That's how long it's been since I've done a filter change in this tank. So the water doesn't really flow through my filters for the most part. It just backflows and flows back down into the middle of the tank. This is going to be likewise. Let me move that. See, that's what my filter looks like. The water just swirls around and just comes right back here and flows over the backwash. A little bit of stuff is going over the top, but nothing is going through those filters. Now in this tank, because it's got the 3 goldfish, and goldfish have a huge bioload for their size, I do have a sponge filter in this tank, and so that is giving me some biological filtration. I put some of that frog bit in here too. You can see a little bit over here. I also, if you see this white stuff down here, that is crushed coral. Just threw a little bit of that in there to add a little bit of mineralization to the tank. My water is very soft, and I like to add a little bit of calcium and magnesium to the water. The fish themselves are doing well. This is Wednesday, this is Bruce Brown, and this is Melissa Fish. Not many of my fish have names, but these do. And Wednesday there is my fanciest of fancy fishes. In fact, she was named Wednesday by the person that gave me the fish. Again, very, very fancy goldfish. And she wanted to name her Wednesday, and I said, well, she's giving me the fish. She can name it whatever she wants. So that is Wednesday. Probably not the name I would have picked, but there you go. So both of these are Oranda. That is a fantail Oranda there. That is a fancy peacock fantail Oranda. Again, my fanciest of fancy fishes. And poor little Bruce Brown back here is just a fantail goldfish. He's nothing super fancy. Just a regular old salt of the earth kind of guy. So there you go. That is my, what I think of as my ham tank, only because the fish ham it up every time I point the camera at them. But that is my fancy goldfish tank. So we will move along to my 125 discus tank. We got in here not too long ago and did some serious gardening. I removed a ton of my red tiger lotus. So some of the pads have made it back to the top. But you can see I've got nice good coloration. It's nice and red, looking beautiful. And we're getting a lot of new growth. Everything's filling in nicely. And it won't be long before I have pads floating on the surface again and have lotus flowers blooming in my tank. I regularly get the lotus flowers blooming in the tank. That's a millennium rainbow fish. It's an albino millennium rainbow fish. The dark orange one you see before you is the male, and the yellowy one in the background is a female. Got another female swimming around back there. And of course we've got the discus in here looking beautiful. I have two that have paired off. And we're doing some spawning behavior the other day, but they never did wind up laying any eggs. Nothing ever came of it. And we're back to square one. So I've seen them lay eggs a few times in here, but they often will lay them on the heater in the corner, and as soon as the heater comes on, it just cooks the eggs and they're dead pretty much immediately. So if I ever caught them in the act, I could always unplug that heater, but I've never caught them in the act of laying the eggs. The other night we saw them, and we waited and waited. It was during a live stream, and we put the camera right on them, and they were certainly looking like any second now they were going to start depositing eggs. You know, rubbing up against the glass. Her vent was all swollen up. I was just waiting for her to start depositing the eggs, and she just never did. Came down the next morning, there was no eggs, no sign of the spawning behavior. It was all just whatever was going to happen, it happened, and nothing became of it. So someday we might see some little baby discus swimming around in here, but I'm not doing anything specifically to breed them. I'm not putting any mops or cones or anything like that for them to lay on. I'm just letting them do their thing, and if I get babies, I get babies, and that'll be awesome. But I'm just going to let it happen naturally, as does in my other tanks. I've got diamond tetras that breed regularly, and I've had a few other fish over the years that have just bred without me doing anything to encourage it. I figure they know what they're doing more than I do, so I'll just leave them to it. And we'll see what happens. So that's my 125 discus tank. We also cut back this piece of Anubias. This Anubias was actually growing up to the surface of the water, and cutting that back also opened the tank up and let a ton of light in. And you can see we've got a lot of light in this tank. And so my discus tank is looking good. Alright, moving on. This is my betta tank. It's a 20-gallon tank. It's got my betta fish in there somewhere. I do not see him at the moment. But I've already put some shrimp in this tank, and I have seen them in there. So I know the shrimp have survived. We've got some guppies. I used to have embers, tetras in here, but they've all died over the years. I really need to get in, and you can see how scummy the water's almost starting to look. It's getting that biofilm on it. There's really no circulation on this side of the tank because of, well, you know, because of that. Looks good, but it's really just killing the circulation. There he is. I figured if we puttered around here in front of the tank long enough, he would come out to say hello, thinking he's going to get some nummies. He is not. But that is Gilgalad. That is my half-moon betta fish. I do have a plaquette up in my office tank. And so there you go, and that is a look at my 20-gallon betta tank. Not a lot going on in there. Nothing really going on in my quarantine tank. I did put some shrimp in there to see if they would eat the hair algae. The hair algae is going away, but I haven't really looked closely to see what's going on in there. I don't know. I don't see a bunch of shrimp swimming around or anything, so I don't really know what's going on in that tank. Again, tune into my live stream. We'll talk about that more during the live stream or whatever, when we'll really get down there and have a look at it and see what's going on with those shrimp, etc. So we will wrap up last but not least with my tank that used to once upon a time be Butterbean's tank. I still miss him, as do many of you, I'm sure. But this is the tank I was talking about moving that one lone Gambusia into. While most of these minnows in here are probably some, as of yet, unidentified Neotropis species. The ones with the dark line down the side, the larger ones, I believe are a Neotropis species. There's a lot of Neotropis species out there. They all look very, very similar. So I'm not even going to bother trying to figure out what exactly they are. Honestly, I don't really care. I've also got some tiny little fish in there that are growing at a very different rate than the larger ones. So they're clearly two different types of fish at this point. I don't know what the smaller ones are. I think they are some kind of shiner, possibly an emerald shiner, but I do not know. I only say that because I have seen little flashes of a sort of bluish green color as they flash. So I definitely think they're a kind of shiner because of the way they shine when they flash. But figuring out which kind of shiner they are is going to be about as fun as trying to figure out what species of Neotropis they are. So again, I'm just calling them minnows, but I do know for a fact that a few of them in there are Gambusia. I can recognize Gambusia on sight. Now again, don't know what species of Gambusia they are, but obviously I've got Gambusia in the tank because that is one of them. And so if I can catch that other one that's the lone Gambusia and throw it in this tank, at least it'll have a few others of its kind to spend its last days with. And so that's pretty much my goal in doing so. Otherwise, you can see there's one of my discus right there. I don't see the other one, but I've got two discus in this tank. And these are the two discus I was talking about that seem to have paired off and were bullying that third discus, who has been moved over here into my 55-gallon gourami tank. And honestly, this one is starting to look better than the way those other two look. Colors on them are just fantastic. It's almost like a tangerine color with dark, almost black markings, and then there is iridescent blue, all traceries throughout all the fins. Really, really pretty discus. Discus, unfortunately, are very similar to angelfish in that when you try to film them, they always face the camera, and so they can't be seen. But that is the same species as what we've gotten here. And again, I see the one back there, but I don't see the other one. But there are two in there, trust me. Unless something's happened overnight and one of them vanished. Maybe the aliens got it, I don't know. Let's try looking in the end of the tank and see if we can see where the other one is in there. Nope, I don't see it in the back either. Now that is weird because they're usually together. It'll turn up. It's in there somewhere. It's probably hiding because I'm spending so much time walking around right in front of the tank like this. Although I'm looking and I really don't see it. I hate it when I do this. I find a tank where I got a fish that I know is in there and I just can't find it. So considering how hard it was for me to find that bright blue discus that was in my 55, I can imagine these tiny little discus can hide just about anywhere. So again, I'm not going to worry too much about it. If I don't see the other one turn up, at some point, I might start getting a little more concerned. But for the time being, we're going to call that good. So there you go, everybody. Thanks for watching. We've made it all the way around the world. Don't forget to tune in to my live streams every Friday night and Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. Thanks for watching. I'll see you real soon in the next one.